Welcome, and I hope that you're as excited to be here as I am. There's been a request. We asked some people what they wanted to have a salon on, and people were like, "I'm confused about sound. I'm confused about sound. I'm confused about sound." So we're having a salon on sound design, and so I hope this is an opportunity for you to learn and for you to ask questions and hear things that you may not have heard before and understand things you may not have understood before. And that's why we have these salons so that you can be educated, you can grow as a judge and as an audience member. Um, we have with us today four panelists who will share with us various aspects of sound design. At the end, I will allow time. We will have time allotted for you to ask questions. Either jot them down yourself or put them in the chat, and Kate will keep track of them and come back to them for us to ask our panelists. So that being said, let's begin. So I want to introduce to you our panelists, and I'm just going to read because that's what I can do. Our first panelist is Preston Goodson. He is a Suzi Award-winning sound and video designer who has been working in the Atlanta area for over a decade, including at Georgia Ensemble Theater, Actors Express, Synchronicity Theater, Theater Emory, and the Atlanta Lyric Theater, among many others. He's been active in the theater, film, podcast, and gaming industries and has worked in all areas of AV, production design, and implementation. You can next hear some of his work in Georgia Ensemble's Ain't Misbehaving. Our next panelist is Robert Drake, who has been designing since 1998 and is the artistic director of the Academy Theater and the vice president of the Atlanta Radio Theater Company. He has designed sound for dozens of companies, from traditional theaters to operas to radio theater companies. And he proudly boasts that he is one of very few people in this city who can say that, and maybe the only person in the city that says that he has done sound design for professional wrestling. Chris Lang. Chris is a sound designer, a music producer, and mixing engineer. Only being in Atlanta for 3 years now, he's been able to showcase his work in most theaters around Atlanta, from the Alliance to Actors Express to True Colors Company and more. Since being here, he has also co-founded a new company, Multi-Band Studios, looking to bring more diverse talent behind the scenes. And Bobby Johnston. Bobby Johnston has spent 25 years working and living in Atlanta, but now makes his home in Nashville, Tennessee with his wife, Joy, and daughter, Dylan, where he continues to be a freelance video and sound designer, as well as taking on the role of director of media and production for a Nashville-based church called The Hills. Bobby's work has been seen and heard on stages throughout the world, live television events, and award shows, and at large corporate events for more than 25 years. He has not only worked for 10 plus years as a theatrical sound and video designer, but has also toured the world as an audio engineer and production manager with national music acts, with bands ranging from the Gap Band to the Eagles and the Rascal Flatts. So please put your virtual hands together and your real hands together for our four panelists. Kate, are you able to highlight them so that
what if you've not done this yet, go to the view button in your in the top right corner and click on speaker, and that way you'll be sure to see who's speaking when.
Okay, that will be fine. Okay, so I have asked each of these gentlemen to give us 5 minutes to talk about some of the areas in which they are passionate in this field. I'd also like to shout out to Danny and Kimberly Harding, who both do some sound stuff, are sound designers. So they might have some things to add to us as well. So, Preston, I'm going to ask you to please speak to us a little bit about the different roles and jobs in the sound design field that we sometimes don't recognize.
All right, cool. Well, hi, everybody. Glad to be here. So I'm going to relate this to the first time I was nominated for a Suzi Award. And that the first time I was nominated, A, I was ecstatic. Thank you. But B, it was 2 nominations for very different shows for which I did very different work, which I had very different emotional, personal relationships to. On Ghost the Musical, I was the primary sound designer and mixer, and it was my first show with Georgia Ensemble Theater up in the Roswell Cultural Arts Center. It all involved not only making the music sound good in the room, but involved making the sounds. And it was my first time in that space, so I had to get comfortable with all the equipment there. On The Legend of Georgia McBride at Actors Express, about the eponymous drag queen, I was mostly a music supervisor and sound programmer. And I'll talk about, that's a lot of different kinds of jobs that I just talked about. And especially in the Atlanta theater scene, individuals on any particular production might take single or multiple roles. And that's what leads to sort of the confusion about the different jobs in this, in sound, in narrative arts. So for me, and of course, there's going to be a lot of different definitions for these roles. So I'm going to sum them up. And if anybody shakes their head at them, they can feel free to correct me when it's their turn. Sound designer is the person who creates the sound cues for a show. So like a phone rings, they're the person that records a phone or finds a phone sound and then provides that to the sound programmer, who puts it in the computer to be implemented digitally. And then a separate role from that can be the music supervisor, who is the person who chooses pre-made music for the show. So like generally, this is the person that will be involved in lobby music, that sort of thing. And of course, a composer actually creates music for a show. And a sound mixer will blend all the sound sources in the space and help make the entire show cohere. And this is most important if there's microphones involved and musicians involved. The sound engineer will create the physical system that provides the sound in the space, or adapt it if it's a sort of permanent sound thing. And then sort of a catch-all A2 or utility, they work backstage making sure the performances stay consistent, especially with actors, microphone placements and things like that, and also help with load in and load out. Now, why did I mention those particular shows in relationship to these jobs? Well, vainly, when we get down to it, I did a lot more work on Ghost, and the lion's share of the work on Georgia McBride, which I'm extremely proud of, was more of a collaboration, and was about picking the best and most appropriate pre-existing music, which means the award I eventually won for Georgia McBride, I technically shared not only with the director and the choreographer, but I also shared with Cher and Dolly Parton, and they may not have known their contribution to the piece. With Ghost, I did an extensive amount of work in a new space doing randomized ghost sounds for whenever Sam interacted with an object. You know, I was pressing a button that would swoosh through things. Since the space was extremely new to me, the mix was probably not one of my best mixes, because a lot was being thrown at me all at once. And I think, so that's something to think about for the Suzis, especially when you think about individual contributions between sound and music, especially because the sound categories at the Suzis are not divided by profession, which they are, say, at the Oscars, which is much more about the unions, but we don't have to get into that. What does it mean if you've got a mediocre mix covering up a potentially amazing work by a music director? You know, often the music director, for neither better or worse, has less control over the final product that gets to the audience's ears than the mixer does. What does it mean if you're moved by the choice of music, but that person was otherwise not involved with the production? Are you giving an award to Linda Ronstadt or the music supervisor? And when everything works, is it more impressive if it's a team of people in a beautiful venue or a single person in a black box that did a lot of work? The answer is going to be different every time. And this is not to say that the thinking for the awards has been off or anything like that. Clearly, I won. So something worked. But it's good to think about how the different jobs interact with each other to create your perceptions of artistic excellence, to consider how the end result got there and who was responsible. Even on the next show I'm working on, Ain't Misbehaving, I'm solely going to be working on the engineering the physical system. Chris Lane, who's going to be talking next, he's going to be, he and his company are going to be the primary providers of that sound there. But if you list us by alphabetical order in a nomination, it's going to look like I'm the audio lead because my name starts with G and his starts with L. So it's one of those things to think about. What are the contributions and who actually makes those contributions, and who is more responsible for the awards. And I think that's my time. So there we go.
All right. So next on our list of folks is Robert Drake, because you mentioned sound and building sound. I want Robert to talk to us a little bit about, and you mentioned Dolly Parton and Linda Ronstadt. So I want Robert to talk to us a little bit about building sound, Foley sound versus going to the internet and finding sound, and talk to us a little bit about copyright and licensing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think Preston's comments were extremely informative. I tend to work in smaller venues than I think most of the other sound designers here, where I'm taking all of those roles and I'm responsible for everything except maybe being the mixer. Although sometimes I need to be that person too. But in some of the work I do, and I'm a huge fan of this, I love having actors make sounds live, and that's called Foley work. And in Foley, that comes from radio theater, where you had people who made all of those sounds. And so there are times, if you're doing a show where a character interacts with the sound, or their change in emotion comes from that sound, having a live actor make that sound can serve the story you're trying to tell. And I love to show off, and I love to put inside jokes in all of the work I do. Brenda in particular knows this, that I'll put stuff in my design where if you know what's going on and you're smart enough about the semiotics, you'll catch additional meanings from the sounds I provide. But I'm providing a recorded product where sometimes having an actor do that live is a big deal. The other thing that I wanted to talk about too is that often directors will tell me when I provide them sounds, well, that doesn't sound like that, when I went and recorded the actual thing. And we were talking a little before, I had a director once who told me that a P51 didn't sound like what an actual P51 sounds like. And I know what a P51 sounded like because I went and recorded it both outside the cockpit and flying inside the cockpit. So it was a real P51. Trust your sound designers. If we tell you this is what a thing sounds like, then you should have some faith in the people you're working with. Now, you may want a different sound and you may want to represent something else with it, but don't try and tell us that isn't what that sounds like, because it is. Lastly, Brenda asked me to talk about a little bit about legals and licensing. Hopefully every venue in which all of the directors are working here have ASCAP and BMI licenses. If your venue, and it's dependent on the venue where the performance happens, doesn't have an ASCAP and BMI license, you cannot use copy copyrighted music. And as annoying as it is, the word is copyrighted, not copywritten. It's annoying and sad. But if you have a basic ASCAP and BMI license, you can use pre-recorded music as an incidental part of your show. So if it's scene transitions, I can use music for that. You cannot ask me to use copyrighted music to advance the plot of your show unless it's under 28 seconds. And even then you're in iffy territory. So don't ask us to put, 4 minutes of a song in that advances the plot of your show without licensing that song. And you can license that song. It's not that hard. It'll cost you a little bit of money. Licensing an individual song for a 225 seat venue is usually about $100. If anybody knows better, let me know. But it's usually about $100 a song for a 6 show a week run for a month. And so if you're doing a show where licensing the show doesn't include a required song, do that work. Don't put your sound designer in a position where they're going, I'm not supposed to do this. Because that makes a huge difference. And again, I think that is my time. And so I yield.
So Robert spoke a little bit about him being working in smaller venues. So I'm going to ask Bobby to talk a little bit about the size of venues, the equipments and budgets that various venues have, and how that affects what you hear and possibly how you judge.
Yeah, thanks. I guess I don't want to just add to the list that confuses you guys even more or makes it feel like, wait, we need 10 sound categories, right? And so I appreciate the idea that we're doing our best to recognize the people in Atlanta, and we can't have a separate award for the sound mixer and a separate award for a budget above $100,000 and below 200 seats. And I know that you've tried to create rules that allow shows to be part of the Suzi judging process, but kudos to you, and I'll try not to confuse it anymore. One of the things I think that budget makes a big difference is or I should say 3 of the things are the 2 things that these guys have already talked about. The staff that you have on a show, and the time that you are allowed to work on the show, whether that's in tech itself or we know we're going to put you on a retainer for 6 months and there's going to be 6 months worth of changes, or are you coming in for I see these guys gasping, are you coming in for 3 days and we're going to knock this out? And so there is a lot of difference between a lot of shows before we ever even talk about the difference between a $600 sound console, which several theaters in Atlanta have, and a $160,000 sound console. There are wireless microphones that are literally $100, and there's microphone systems where just the microphone may be $1,000 before you ever even add on a $6,000 transmitter. So again, not to leave you guys with your hands raised now, I don't even know what to do, but there are some big differences between the venues and show budgets, and I guess what you should expect when you go into a show. I think one of the things that could be interesting to think about is, wow, this was in a field and I heard every word and I was moved by the dynamics of the music, and the orchestra sounded amazing, and there were 2 speakers in bushes, versus I went into, I don't want to pick on the Alliance, but they are sort of the flagship, right? I went into the Alliance and it's like, well, yeah, it probably should have sounded great in there, right? some of the things I'll touch real quickly on that the budgets can affect, like I said, are the time. He talked about, going and flying on a P-51 and getting to record all those sounds. And I'll be honest, if I'm only going to get paid a couple $100 for a project, I'm not going to be able to devote as much time as I would if I was getting paid, $10,000 for a project. And in Atlanta, there is also that disparity between shows, between theater companies. And then when you step into another level of touring shows that, have come in, I have literally worked for a week and made enough money to buy a car, and worked for a week and made not enough money to put the gas in that same car. So it's difficult when you're trying at this level to kind of string together a career and work in a city. And people always ask me, like, what's my day rate? Well, it honestly just depends on the situation. We then kind of have to try to gauge our client and go, all right, this is Coca-Cola. I can obviously charge much more than I can a startup theater company that I know there's only going to be 40 people in the audience, right? So I talked about time, and that also can affect your time for rehearsal and how much tech time you have. Again, are we doing a 2 nights of rehearsal and we're going to open this show because we just don't have the budget to keep people on salary for weeks at a time? Or, like I said, are we going into this project knowing that we're going to work on this for 6 weeks, and chances are the show that we open with isn't even going to look like the show that we start rehearsal with? So budget affects time, budget affects the staff, which Preston talked about. Am I the only guy? So am I the sound designer catch-all? So am I coming up with every sound effect element? Am I mixing the show? Am I loading in the sound system? And am I the only person that is sound savvy at the show? So if I'm mixing and a microphone goes out, is there anybody backstage to fix that mic? And it may very well be that there's just not the budget to keep those people on. And a decision was made by the company that said, it's kind of that adage of like the insurance of like, it's going to cost us more to keep this person backstage. It's not worth another $1,000 to have to employ somebody. We would rather just have a microphone go out. And that's the decision that everybody is unfortunately forced to make based on their budget. So time, staff, and then equipment, like I said, it varies greatly, and you can get the job done with a lot of things, but it is kind of unfair to say that it's all an equal level playing field. Even on this Zoom call, I'm talking through a $700 microphone and a mic pre, and I have all kinds of things. And I would guess that you can hear a difference between each of us when we're talking, right? The difference between your computer audio and mine. I don't know, maybe mine sounds horrible on your end, but there is a difference between the equipment, and it would just be an interesting test to see as we go down this line. I think Preston has a mic on his headset. I've got this recording mic. Some people might just be using the mic on their laptop, and you'll hear immediately the sound difference, right? So I think I probably just presented more confusion, but I just wanted to kind of point out some differences between what to expect when you go to a show. And if you feel like you've gone out to a 50-seat theater and you're like, this is as good as any Broadway show I've ever heard, that's something to probably recognize. That would be my input on it. Not to say that those higher end shows aren't worth the recognition, but I think that trying to level that playing field and go like, well, yeah, we expect a little more out of this theater company because it's a brand new building versus we're trying to scrape by with some speakers on sticks. And I'd also love to hear some of my other designers' input on that. Some of my proudest things I've ever done are those shows where it was like 2 speakers in bushes and people were amazed by it, or just some crazy, Serenbe situation where an orchestra is 1,000 feet away, but yet we were able to still make it happen. Versus if I go into a theater with $1 million worth of stuff and 5 other sound guys, I'm like, well, yeah, it probably should have sounded great. So those are my thoughts on the budget disparities. And just something to keep in mind when you go into a show.
Well, I am using the mic on my laptop. I sound great, don't I?
Well, see, I'll say all that, and then you guys will just be like, I don't hear a difference between anybody talking. So that, that also could be a bit
Well,
of
you
your
already
issue.
got somebody in the chat saying they were wondering what kind of mic you used. It sounded great.
Oh yeah.
So, but you talked about things being on an equal playing field. And we have spent a lot of time at the Suzi's this past year talking about equality and equability, being equitable. And so I want to ask Chris to speak a little bit about diversity in this field. I automatically notice that we have all men on our panel. That doesn't mean that there are all men that are sound designers. In fact, we had a lady on our panel, and she was sick this evening, so she's not able to join us. But I want to talk a little bit about diversity in all aspects of this job. Go ahead, take it away, Chris.
Yeah. And no, thank you for that introduction and that segue. And actually, yeah, part of the reason we don't have that woman representation right now is because people burn out, and I think that's saying the information without saying too much about what happened with this person. But a lot is asked of us. A lot of times as sound designers, no matter what role that we're in, whether it's designers, engineers. And I think a lot is asked of us because people just don't know sometimes. Sound is so taboo. It's like, yeah, do that thing, compose something for us if you can't find it. And a lot of times they think that can happen overnight. But for me, a lot of times when people hear like, oh, we need more diversity, a lot of times it seems like the solution is like, oh, let's find somebody of color and throw them in the show. But it's not that. I mean, when I think of diversity, I definitely think of, are we casting this show correctly? Right? I think a lot of times, especially in and around Atlanta, companies get in this habit of, you're a sound designer with skill, you can do any show. But no, I mean, as producers, directors that are out there, are you really finding the right person for the task at hand? And I think that also influences how we look at shows when we sit as an audience member. Like, are we asking ourselves the question of, was this casted correctly from the design standpoint? Not just the casting that we see on stage, but is it a perfect fit in terms of design? And of course, a lot of times that perfect fit comes with diversity, knowing who is out here working, not just the people that each theater is used to necessarily using for every show. But finding those women who are out here, finding people of color, finding minorities, finding people from the Asian community, Hispanic community. Like, there are definitely a lot of people out here that get ignored a lot of times because designers aren't cast the right way. And beyond diversity, one thing that I also wanted to talk about is just health. And on the physical health side, just ear health. We listen to a lot of sounds. There's a lot of radiation in sound waves, and we are often up close and personal with it. So definitely for us, there's a need to take serious breaks, because when we're not in a theater space listening to loud music, we might be at home listening to loud music. And that can also affect mental health. So just adequate breaks in the process, treating everybody with that due respect from a physical side and a mental side. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
I can say that I am already, I mean, my mind is going, "Whew, I didn't know that. Oh, I didn't realize that. Wow. There are things going on and questions going on. Um, I I think Robert Drake mentioned a couple of things, like don't ask us to do this. I'm sure all of you have a few pet peeves that you come across. I'm gonna start with Chris. Is there a pet peeve that you want those of us who are on here that are producers and directors and even actors to know? There are some people that are not those things, but is there a pet peeve?
I don't know how big this is, but my immediate pet peeve that comes to mind is just sound often going last in production meetings, and design meetings. We're often the quickest. It's like, we know our hit list, the mics work, the mics don't work, let's switch this out. But yeah, oftentimes we sit through very long set conversations, props conversations, and a lot of companies just take us last. So that's an immediate pet peeve.
Okay, Bobby.
I think, as I was talking about budgets, one of the things that's my pet peeve is being presented with, this is what we're going to do, and then here's the budget, as opposed to, this is what I would like to do, how much is this going to cost? So if your budget is $1,000, I'm just, for every show, but then this show we're going to have 50 people in it. That's a huge pet peeve when it's never considered. I often feel like the producing process is kind of done backwards, where it's like, oh, we want to do the show, let's figure out how much it's going to cost, as opposed to, we're going to do the show and it's only going to cost us $1,000, when then we're put in a position that it's unreasonable to come up with the things we need for that amount of money.
Okay. Robert Drake.
I think I have two pet peeves. The most important pet peeve is, don't ask sound designers to come up with sounds early for you to use through the rehearsal process. And then 2 or 3 weeks after we get producers or directors sounds, so what did you think of those sounds? What do you need us to think? Oh, I don't know, I didn't listen to them. We'll address that in Tech Week. There are very few times when I'm angry enough to blow up the building. That is one of those times. And I would say the second thing is, again, don't tell your sound designers that things don't sound like they sound like. You can, again, give your sound designers the trust to come up with ideas, and you can not like those ideas, that's fine, but give us the space to create for you. If you're so good that you know exactly what you want, then you can do that work and you can save yourself the cost of having a sound designer. But if you want a sound designer and you want a music selector and you want good engineering, if you can't do all those things yourself, then trust the ideas of the people who you've engaged to give you new and interesting ideas that you might not have considered.
Okay, Preston.
So my biggest pet peeve is sort of about how humanity talks about sound in general, as a sound designer, because, it's not with any particular person or action. Most human languages are really terrible about talking about sound. And that has more to do with our biology than any sort of artistic education. Our eyes are on the front of our head, not our ears. So our eyes, our sense of touch, are much more important to human beings than they are our ears. And, that's why many of the words we use to describe sounds, other than maybe volume, it's going to be warmer, brighter, sharper, and we talk about audio point of view, the point of view on stage we're listening from. Well, there it is. I'm saying point of view. It's nothing. And so this is a problem when talking with directors or other artists, because our languages are so inherently terrible at getting requests and desires about audio across, and it's very imprecise. And so it's easy to blame the director for not knowing how to talk to us. Well, no one knows how to talk about sound, really. I mean, if someone says to you, can you make that less piercing? A dozen different people have 100 different meanings for the same word, depending on what they've eaten that day, and it's just originating from the fact that, this is more important than this in our brains. And it's, there's a great book, Audio Vision by Michael Sheon. It's sort of a classic sound philosophy work for creatives if you want to read a book. It's originally in French, but it's been translated to English. So that's a great book to talk about that.
Okay, we are right on time. And I'd like to open it up for questions because, as I said, I've learned an awful lot. And there are a few other sound designers that are on board with us. They may have some things to say as well.
We've got a question from Lori Holmes. What opportunities are there in Atlanta to learn the skills for sound design for diversity and mentoring? And then after that, we've got Melody, and then Sandra, I think you're after that.
Okay.
Yeah, on the mentoring question, I've only been in Atlanta for 3 years. Part of when I first got here, I was actually surprised at how there didn't really seem to be any pipeline built in for people who were like newly interested in sound or coming straight out of school and they wanted to sort of like get through the door some way, somehow. Personally, I helped co-found a company called Multiband Studios that is sort of built on those very principles of teaching people how to do what we do. Some people might come through the door with a band background and they have a love for music and they're interested in getting into the theatrical space, the film space, or vice versa. Somebody has theatrical knowledge, but they want more studio mixing and mastering experience. So that's part of the gap that we have been seeming to fill with Multiband Studios. And we take advice from other people who've been in the game longer than us. Bobby has been instrumental in helping teach me, and then I pass on that knowledge to other people who are on the Multiband Studios team. So I know that's one avenue, but I think there needs to be more, for sure, opportunities for mentorship that are looking for people who are minorities out here.
And yeah, just to add on to that, I will agree. It's fairly mediocre pickings here in Atlanta for pipelines into the industry, because the reason I got into sound design was because I was an acting intern at Actors Express, and then they needed a mixer for Great American Trailer Park Musical, and I had previous, I had musical experience, and so I, as an intern, I could do that. It wasn't because they had an actual sound design internship. They were just like, actor, do thing. And it just happened to be something that sparked something inside of me. And I also have to say, what Atlanta does to turn off young people coming into this industry is they hire young people because they're cheap. So they look to people coming from the colleges because they feel like they can pay them less than they can pay me. And that is a real shame. I think they should be paid just as much as me, or everybody else here should be paid just as much as anybody else here if you're doing the same work. And people go to and Atlanta theater companies go to colleges and go to internships and say, oh, because you have less experience, I can pay you less. And what that says is, okay, I'm going to go to another city or another career. And that's the unfortunate thing about this city in terms of like developing new talent, is that they see new talent as cheap talent, not new talent.
I can agree and build off of what you said, Preston. If anyone is interested in learning anything about sound, I would never turn anybody away from volunteering to come and hang out with me during a tech week. Not a counterpoint to what you said, but I also think that that's your responsibility to not just wake up one day and be a $10,000 project sound designer. You
of
have
course.
to earn, and that becomes like a bad phrase, because it's like we're trying to make you do something, unfair. But you do kind of need to work your way through. I mean, and you deserve to be paid the same as long as you're working on the same level as me, and have the same experience, I think. But you're right. We do oftentimes just try to just fill the spot with anybody that'll do the whole show for $500 or whatever. And that turns people off real quickly, because it's a lot of hard work to run a show. And at the end of it, you're like, wait a minute, I made $10 a show. This doesn't make any sense. I'm going to go do something else completely, or go to a different city. But I think step one, and I worked with some of Chris's people and other people all over town. Like, if you'd like to learn, show up. That's a great way to start.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to our next question.
Melody and then Sandra.
Hi, my name's Melody. It says it in my little title right there. But my first question is, how do you even get the sound designing gigs? And is there a union for sound designing?
I'll start and you guys can add. I mean, sort of what Chris was saying, so much of it for many years was, I did a gig, and then, are you available for the next one? Yeah, I can do the next one. And you just kind of get yourself in the mix, no pun intended, and then you're the guy until you can't do one of their shows. And so I think, to Chris's point, it's important to bring in some new people and get some new people in the queue, if you will, to be in line to do some shows. But I think, again, showing up and being available is a big part of it, and letting people know that you're available. Sending out your resume, making some phone calls is step one for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I would say the Atlanta theater it's very ununionized in terms of where sound is concerned, extremely so. I think they're sometimes covered under, if it's a LORT theater, it will be sometimes fees and are sort of covered by LORT's conversation with the national unions, and that's how you'll get like a union rate even in this city. It's you're much more likely to get unionized work in the film and television industries, and even radio, and that will be divided up by profession. So, like, if you're a sound editor, that'll be MPSE, and if you're a composer, you'll be working with other people like that. I think sound engineers or like utility A2 are covered under IATSE sometimes. And then front of house, it's a little bit different. And but I'll just again agree. If you know a sound designer, at some point they're going to want a second set of ears on something. And that's a great way of just getting into the industry, of just being like, hey, if you just need, if you're just working, can I just come and sit and listen? And most sound designers will just, please, thank you, because I'll have a second person. And they'll probably buy you dinner. So yeah.
Okay.
To chime in on what Preston said and what others have said, when I do a large theater gig, I need basically sound electricians. I need people to help. If I have 6 choir mics to hang, I need help doing that. And one of the ways to get in, especially if you don't know gain from loudness, if you don't know the basics, is apprentice. Come really work with someone. Because I agree with Mr. Johnson's point of view, you earn more money as your skills improve. If you don't know how to use a banded EQ, then you're not gonna be able to do as much. But I can teach you that. And if you're working to, if you're trying to learn, come, I'll pay you to be an electrician, and I'll teach you what I'm doing as I'm doing it, to help me run cable, help me hang microphones, help get them aimed, all that sort of thing. So come aboard.
So we have like 5 or 6 more questions. Okay, next question or next person.
That was Sandra.
Okay.
Okay, my question is, as I really appreciate this information about the whole process that you guys go through. But what I'm thinking about is sitting in my seat watching the show and saying to myself, okay, does this design contribute to the play or does it not? And quite frankly, I could care less whether it costs $300 or $30,000. I'm looking for the answer to that question. And I assume that that has been fed by a director's vision. So if in fact that is not so, I guess I need to hear from you. And that, I guess that's my question.
The director always informs the sound design. Design is a service industry. You are you are helping achieve the director's vision. You have the skills to help achieve that vision. And that's basically it. Like, the director is sort of the lead, but there's going to be very different amounts of sound savviness depending on the director. And and that's sort of what's the point of my presentation was like, it's going to be a very different contribution between the director and the sound designers, and based on not only how many people are there, but the savviness of the director in terms of sounds. Like, there's a lot of directors that are just like, do it. And then there's a lot of directors that are just like, I've already cued everything in the script. This is how I want, this is the exact sound I want here. And then you find your ways to be creative within that. And it's very different production from production. And it's inherently supposed to be hard to figure that out for the audience. And I think it's just sort of something to think about as industry insiders, not something you'll necessarily get from the ultimate creative result.
Okay, Kate, next.
Yes, Margaret had 2 great questions. It was, what do you recognize as some of the problems in sound design? When do you recognize a problem? What do you recognize as problems? And for our judges, what do you feel they should be aware of in terms of good versus bad sound design?
So in terms of problems, do you have the resources available to you to achieve what the director wants to achieve? Because if you have a director who wants 20 microphones and has say 300 sounds in a show, and those sounds have to come from a wide variety of places, including, say, a moving object, and their entire budget for sound design is $300, you're not going to get as good a product. So it's making sure that you have the resources, and you can tell pretty quickly what those things are. And what I ask judges to do when you're looking at a sound design is, did the sound make your experience of the show better? Did, if the sounds and the mixing and the choice of music and the work of the sound did not advance your understanding of the show and enhance your emotion and give you things to think about, then that was a less successful sound design. If the sound affected you and affected you in the context of the show, that's a successful sound design. You know, does it serve the script? Does it serve the director's vision? That's success. It's not there to dazzle you. It's there to support the show.
The next question we have is from Terry Walls. So if a production has previously been produced on Broadway or elsewhere, how faithful do you have to be to the original production?
Anybody like to answer that one?
You don't. In fact, that's another place you would get into trouble with copyright issues. I mean, ideally, you're not doing a show where someone shows you a Broadway video and says, recreate this. That's not a fun situation for any of us either. I have done shows where part of what we licensed was packages from the show that weren't necessarily sound effects, but certainly costumes and things like that can be purchased as part of your licensing agreement. But you don't have to be faithful to the original production. Usually people are trying to be like the original production because Broadway is the benchmark, right? But there's no rule that says you have to be.
Our next question is from Steve Berman, and Steve says, I found that all the items pertaining to a show, it seems like sound is the weakest link at just about every theater in this city. What are your thoughts on that? And I will piggyback on Steve's question there, because that is, as a director, I have found it's one of the areas that I think when it's fantastic, you almost don't notice it. But when it's wrong, people are unforgiving, especially if a mic goes out or something technical goes wrong that you have absolutely no control over. It's one of the things that people are sort of the harshest about. Sorry, Steve, I piggybacked on your question.
Well, a lot of that has to do, it's not even budget, it's almost grants. Everybody wants to put their plaque on a seat. No one wants the Preston Goodson Memorial speaker. No, and I'm dead serious. Like, that is absolutely certain. You know, no one wants to help out with the technical sound is extremely expensive. It is often thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars to get a basic sort of system in a space. The other part of that is, and I'm of course not talking about anyone in this room, but the general theater going audience is aging. And all of us listening right now need to go get our ears checked out right now. We don't have enough ear health in talk about ear health enough in the United States. And a lot of times what I'm praised for in my mixes is clarity. And that's because as I've gotten older, I've slowly shifted a lot of what I'm doing to people's voices to just making sure consonants get out. And as soon as people hear consonants, then it's a good thing. And it's because as human beings, as we age, we simply lose the ability to hear consonants first. You know, and that starts at age 30. You know, that's not a thing for people, 40, 50, 60. Hearing starts going for everybody at very young ages. We don't really notice it until we notice it. And then a lot of times we tend to we want other people to speak up. And, I'm probably going to be trying to get a hearing aid myself soon, and I work in sound design, and I shouldn't be ashamed of that. And it's just something that I have to do. But I will say that when you're talking about bad sound design, often it's just intelligibility, and a sound designer needs to recognize that if the audience can't hear the consonants, and understand the words coming out of people's mouths, then then that's a problem they need to fix. So
Can I just say something real quick? I have hearing aids. I
Mhm.
purposely got hearing aids to go to the theater.
yeah,
The first show that I saw, I turned to the person next to me and I said, "There's something wrong with my hearing aids." And he said,
Yeah.
"No." He says, "The sound is terrible."
that is absolutely true. It can be absolutely true. Again, I don't want to blame I don't want to blame hearing loss for everything. As I said, there's a lot you have to engineer for intelligibility.
You are right. Sometimes it's really just bad sound, though, as well. I mean, hopefully, all the shows you go to aren't awful. I mean, hopefully, there's some gyms in there that give you something to relate it to. But yes, there are bad situations for shows. Maybe a theater taking on a show that was bigger than they should have been doing for their stage. We didn't need 5 trumpets in our orchestra or whatever. So some of that can also be a little out of our control and maybe just considered like, poor. We love this title, but it's probably not great for our particular theater company to do. Going back to what we've said before, like we just wanted to do pick the show Wicked, right? Well, we don't have the money to do Wicked. We don't have the orchestra to do. We don't have the microphones. We don't have the speakers. All of that. So you are correct that sometimes it really is not good. So hopefully you're seeing some shows that make you go, "Oh, this is what it should be like," and yeah, those other shows don't win. In the case of the Suzis, if we're only talking about doing shows for the sake of the Suzi judges, which could be a whole nother salon to talk about, right? But I mean, if that is why we're here on this particular thing, is I think also sometimes choices can be made to be like, it's not about awards. We want it to be loud. We want it to sound like a rock show. We know we're not going to please everybody, and sometimes those decisions are made in a show for sure.
Kate, where are we on the questions?
We've got 2 more. Jeffrey asked, what industry software that sound designers should be familiar with? What are the softwares they should be familiar with? And what are the gold standards? His main familiarity is with QLab.
Yeah, I could do this.
Okay.
Yeah, QLab is a huge one. We use QLab for almost every show that needs programmed sound effects. Beyond that, for each sound designer, we might do a little bit of editing work or maybe some mixing work in DAW, which is a software. The most basic software of a DAW is like GarageBand or Audacity, but some of us work out of something like Pro Tools or Logic or Studio One. In terms of software, other than that, not too much. I mean, we need software to program and we need software to edit.
Can I dovetail, Chris?
Yeah.
There is a program called ShowQ Systems.
Yes, for PC.
And ShowQ Systems is the other big program, especially if you're not a Mac person. If you're a PC person, almost everybody runs ShowQ Systems. And the most expensive version of that, which is $170, is a really powerful tool. You can do an awful lot with that program. And I'd say about a third of the theaters I've found use ShowQ Systems rather than QLab. 2/3 will use QLab, but a third use ShowQ Systems.
Okay. And our last question, is that correct? You're muted, Kate.
Sorry, that is it. That was our last question.
This is a conversation that can continue and continue and continue as we begin to understand sound more and what we're looking for and what we're listening for. And as Preston said, and all of our sound designers nodded their head, as Kate said, if it's good sound design, sometimes you don't even notice it. It's there. It forwards the story. I'd like to thank each of you for coming this evening. I'd like to thank Bobby and Preston and Robert and Chris for being here and for speaking and sharing their knowledge, their and being so forthright with what we have here in Atlanta. And I'd like to turn it over to our fearless leader, Miss Kate Warner, for any sort of closing information.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Again, I echo your thanks to our panelists and their time. This is such an important topic. And I think if I may just briefly put an even finer point on it, I don't think it's not that one does not notice excellent sound design. I think it's perhaps one of the most visceral and moving parts of seeing live performance. And so you are moved, but you may not be truly conscious of it. It's working on you in ways that you don't necessarily even go, that's good sound design. I think it's a very good check at the end of the show to say, what did I feel and why did something affect me? I can't imagine having a show without sound to help tell the story. And I think it's one of the things that makes live theater the joy that it is. So thank you again for discussing the creative and technical details with us. I want to sincerely thank all of you judges and members for joining us this evening. This has been one of our best attended salons since earlier this year. So it's great to see you all. Thank you for coming. A quick reminder that our next membership meeting is next Monday, 1 week from tonight, again at 7 p.m. Agenda will be sent out ahead of time. It is truly a check-in membership meeting. Here's the work that we've been up to over the summer, and here's what we're looking ahead for the next few months. So please do register for that. We'll send out a reminder with the link later this week as well. The next salon, I did see topics. The most responses were for lighting. Lighting, and then also costume and props, but more for lighting. So we may be looking at that for our next topic. Another question that has been sort of weaving its way through all of these topics is budget. And I think especially as we're coming out of the shutdown, as we're coming out of what has been an enormously challenging year for so many of our producing partners, this is going to be another good conversation to keep having. Not that it's just, I think understanding the nuance and the expectations at different budget levels and in creative decisions, I think could be very helpful. Also, the last thing I have is if you would please join me in thanking Brenda Porter. Y'all know how hard she works on putting together each one of these salons, so hard, and puts so much into the questions she wants to ask and the people who are here, because she wants this to be a great experience for all of us to keep learning and raising the level of conversation. So big applause for Brenda.
Thank you, Brenda.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks so much. Have a good night.